at the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Suzanne Sawyer with the NNLM Mid-Continental Region, and we welcome you all to our April session of Breathing Along with the RML. A couple of reminders. You are muted, and please stay muted unless you are invited to talk. You may also ask questions or make comments in the chat box. Also in the chat box right now is the link for live captioning for this session. And one last reminder, at the end of the session, when you close out of the webinar, you will be a new web window will open, and there will be a short evaluation of the session, and we'd really appreciate it if you would complete that. And now I'll turn the time over to Robin Woods, who is our Nebraska coordinator, and she will be introducing our speaker for today.
Hello everyone, my name is Robin Woods, and I am the Education and Outreach Coordinator here at Creighton University, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to introduce Shavonne to you today. Shavonne Washington-Krauth is a program manager at Creighton University School of Medicine and chair of their Committee on Diversity and Inclusion. After spending the majority of her career working with patients and community members on health behavior change and tobacco cessation, as well as being a co-investigator on multiple research grants, she is leading the Diversity and Inclusion Strategic Planning and Implementation efforts for the medical school she's called home for the past 13 years. Ms. Washington-Krauth is a trained facilitator on everyday bias in healthcare, Bridges Out of Poverty, and Bridges to Health and Healthcare. And she is a self-proclaimed Air Force brat currently living in Omaha, Nebraska with her husband and 2 sons. We're happy to have you here, Shavonne. And with that, I'll move it over to you.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I hope that you find this an informational presentation. It's usually very interactive, but in this format, it's going to be a little less interactive. We'll be talking to you a little bit more than I normally would. And for this very first portion, I want to go ahead and just say that this is a presentation about self-exploration. It's not one of those blame type of presentations at all, not anything about anybody needing to feel guilty about anything, because this is a human experience that we have. So now I want to put my faith in all of you and ask you all to close your eyes. Just for a couple of seconds here, I'm going to play a video, and I just want you to listen. So here it goes. Okay, and now you can go ahead and open your eyes. And I'm going to play it one more time, and I want you to go ahead to listen and feel free to look at the screen. Now, the reason I played this for you is something that's called the McGurk effect. What most likely happened in that case is when I asked you all to have your eyes closed, the gentleman on the screen said ba ba, ba ba, ba ba. And then when I asked you to listen to it again and you could see the gentleman on the screen, you most likely heard something along the lines of ga ga or da da. And this is an intentional thing that happens. This is called the McGurk effect. It's to highlight how much we actually hear with our eyes. And so the way that they did this was they recorded this gentleman saying ba ba repeatedly. However, when they recorded it, if you have the luxury of being able to both hear and see this, they recorded him on video saying ga ga. And when they put the two together, the audio that says ba ba and the video that says ga ga, our brain, or da da, sorry, our brain has this disconnect, and it has this discomfort because it's confused. And the overriding message that typically gets through is the message that we saw rather than the message that we actually heard. And this is highlighting something that we do on a regular basis, that we're actually, when we're listening to people, we are interpreting a lot of things based on what's actually coming through from our eyes. And then I have one more, oops, I apologize, there we go. I have one more I want you to see here on selective attention. I'd like you to just watch this video real quick and just pay attention to what you see. So before I continue this, I want to take note and wonder how many of you did notice 21 changes. And for those who, most people do not notice 21 changes. All the times I have seen this, I still don't see all 21 on my own. But for those who maybe did see something, kind of ponder on what was your response when you saw the disconnect. But now here I want you guys to get to see exactly what happened right in front of us, but we didn't see because it was hidden. Oop. I'm going to jump forward for you. We'll have to play from the beginning. I'm sorry about that.
At precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Dana Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one doesn't plant petunias until May is out. Take her away. It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
So now that you know that you've been deceived, watch this next portion to see where the changes occurred and how.
Billy, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Dana Smythe.
Okay, our colleagues over at Cook-Ross cleverly put this together, these two sets of slides together to show us the way that things happen in our brains that we don't notice. In this particular case, this is showing selective attention. And selective attention is something that we do a lot when we're given a context of something. Particularly, an example in the medical field is you are asked to look at a specific situation that a patient has. And so now you've been told a particular story, and now you are primed to look for something in particular. And when you're primed to look for something in particular, it's very easy to miss many other things that are there. In a very standard example like this, what I did was I played a video that said who done it. And the first thing that a lot of people are going to do, myself included the first time I saw this, was start looking for clues as to who committed the felony that's on here. And what I started to do is I was watching for hints, and I saw a couple of things, but it didn't make sense and it was irrelevant, so it was very easy to dismiss. And this is something that we do a lot, and it plays into bias that we have in any type of situation. So what is bias? People hear that and they don't necessarily really think through what bias means. They have a tendency, we have a tendency to think bad when we hear bias. And bias in and of itself is not necessarily good or bad, positive or negative. It's merely a judgment or an inclination or tendency that you do without any sort of questioning of it. So it's you passed a judgment on something or another, or a situation or another, and it just happens. You don't really think about it because it's an automatic response. And it's also a shortcut for us to interact in our world, because we can't necessarily take in every single bit of information that we're given all the time. We take cues throughout our lives to be able to give us shortcuts to be able to interpret something. So it's not necessarily good or bad. Where it ends up becoming good or bad is its impact on someone else. So for instance, if I'm in the jungle and the caveman days, and I'm a hunter-gatherer, and I'm out with my friend Judy, and we're searching for some berries, and I hear a rustling in the leaves behind us, and I turn around and I see a tiger. I don't really have time to sit there and say, that's a tiger. I'm a human being. It's a carnivore. As a human being, I am meat. It looks hungry, and I am something it could have for dinner. I better run. I don't have time for that because I'm dead 10 times over. And in best case scenario, I'm going to see that. I'm going to say, oh my gosh, there's a tiger, and take off running. Hopefully I've also warned Judy. And perhaps, you know, the meanest thing I can say is that I hope I'm faster than Judy. But that's an example of how bias comes about. I make a quick decision based on experiences. Many people have been eaten by tigers in the past. I can't outrun a tiger. I'm in danger. I make a shortcut. Now, in that example, absolutely, my life was in danger. It saved my life. However, we make these types of associations. We have this tendencies to make these judgments, and we do this towards other people or in situations that will impact other people, and that's where it starts to get out of hand and starts to become something more. So when you lean into bias and you start talking about that, then it goes towards this presentation. Well, what is unconscious bias then? Well, unconscious bias is when that bias, those biases like I talked about, played out and the mental associations that happen without awareness, intention, or control. And so these are snap judgments that we're making, snap assumptions that we're making, whether positive or negative, and we don't even realize that we're doing it, and we didn't even necessarily mean to do it. And what that ends up being is that they often occur, and they're often in conflict with our conscious attitudes, beliefs, and intentions. And this is really critical when we're working towards learning how to see through this mist of unconscious bias that we live and operate in on a regular basis. If we can't accept that we have these different unconscious biases, even if they conflict with what we consciously believe and feel, we're not going to get anywhere. And that also is where a lot of the tension lies, is that we start to go into that concept of blame or guilt about the things that we do or we think, because we start internalizing that as we're bad people. And that's not always the case at all, especially if you're having that tug of war inside. It probably means that what you're doing and what you're thinking and your initial reaction is actually in conflict with what you would normally want or think in a regular situation. So let's talk about how this can happen, because I've given you generalities and I've given you something that's not going to happen for the most of us in these days. But ways that this can happen, that unconscious bias that's in direct conflict with how you normally would feel or would like to think that you believe or anything like that, the way that this happens to us is that we get this concept of we've been hijacked sometimes. And that can happen because of our background and upbringing, and this doesn't necessarily mean that we were flat out told to think a certain way about anybody. But an example, like I said in my bio, that Robin said in my bio, is I am an Air Force brat. So having been brought up in an Air Force environment my entire life, I'm extremely susceptible to falling back to hierarchy. I am very much aware of hierarchy that exists, and I tend to follow the rules, because growing up there's a distinct hierarchy in the military, and there are divisions within that hierarchy, and you have to know your place, so to speak. You have to know what you are and are not allowed to do and how you're supposed to greet and work. And you also are often taught to recognize the fact that your actions have consequences on others. So I am very aware of those types of things. I also, when I was first born, I was born in Okinawa, Japan. And I have been told, because I was too young to remember, that when we left there and returned to the United States, I was about 2 years old. And having been raised for the first part of my year, or my years, around a large number of people who were Japanese, in addition to the Americans very close to living on the base, I was extremely comfortable around people who looked Japanese especially, but almost in general Asian people. And I would walk up to people who look like that easier than I would someone who was black or someone who was white by skin color. So things about my upbringing can influence how I interact with other people on a regular basis. Also, a huge one that impacts us on a regular basis is media. Media is something that we get exposed to so much on a regular basis through things particularly visual, but also things that we hear and things that we read. And so the media that we're exposed to tells certain stories. Our media right now is becoming even more divisive, which makes those stories that are being told even more prominent. So through our media, an example I give when I'm presenting here locally in Omaha, I often tell people we have media in Omaha that is often very racist in nature. And so we'll have a story that's told about a person and their race or their skin color will be referenced when it actually is completely irrelevant. So we do that in a regular routine here in the United States in our media. We also use those things to drive the attention to the story that is going on. It also happens through media and commercials. We are told certain stories about men or women or children or adults through media, and we take these things in, and they can reinforce beliefs that we don't even necessarily notice that we're absorbing as we go along. Another time that's really dangerous of the way that this can influence us is when we are exposed a lot to stereotype reinforcements. It can also work on the flip side when we are often exposed to people or situations that contradict stereotypes that we're told or that we've learned about. So when you have particularly been taking in information about a type of person or a type of situation that is quote-unquote always this certain way, then when you interact with that person or a person that belongs to that group or situation that is similar, you automatically start making assumptions. And we fall victim to this sort of thing and we don't necessarily know. But on the flip side, say you've been hearing stories and stereotypes about this certain type of group or certain type of situation, but you never see that at all, then it influences you that in a way that when you see that, you may be more defensive or more likely to say, no, that's not true, or be more likely to not understand what other people are seeing because you have always seen the contradiction of the stereotype. Our profession can also reinforce or promote unconscious bias. Something that we do here at Creighton is that we do a lot of outreach, and we tend to do a lot of service towards underserved communities. And what can happen with that is when we're doing that, we accidentally reinforce certain types of biases towards different groups. And I've had this happen for myself. I have worked in an area of Omaha that has a lot higher concentration of people who are living in poverty and who tend to have a higher concentration of people with lower educational level, lower SES overall, and a lot of those people are African American. Now, and because of the way that Omaha is set up. Now, not everybody is, obviously, but that is the image that most people think when they are told this section of Omaha. And I, too, am African American female, and I still fall victim to these assumptions. So I may go to an event in North Omaha, and I'm automatically thinking I'm going to go do service to this area, and someone who looks like me comes and sits down across the table for me to talk to me about health behavior change of some sort. And I may start making assumptions about the person because they've come to talk to me in this environment that they have low SES, socioeconomic status. And I could be completely wrong. And I may start giving examples under the assumption this person may not have or probably doesn't have a lot of resources, but I never asked the question. I just assumed, and I don't realize that I'm doing it at all. I think I'm helpful, and I don't understand why the person's looking at me like I'm crazy or like I'm not being helpful. Or the flip side of that could be I go in from a middle-class mindset that I have, and I start talking, and I'm assuming that the person I'm talking to has access to all the resources that I do. So see, it can play out in multiple ways very much. This also is something that police officers are dealing with. This is how some of this plays out, is seeing the same type of person do the same, quote-unquote, same type of person doing the quote-unquote same type of thing all the time starts feeding into that bias that they don't necessarily recognize is happening. Also, something else that can do it is educational exposure. And so people who are used to everybody not having education, or people maybe who are used to everybody having a higher level of education, start making assumptions about the opposite. I was doing a presentation to the dental school yesterday to give an example of this, in that you may have a person, two people in the room, and Dr. Martin is a dentist and Dr. Smith is a surgeon. And a conversation could go something like this. Say I'm coming in, I'm like, oh, Dr. Martin, what do you do? Well, I'm a dentist. Oh, and Dr. Smith, what do you do? Well, I'm a surgeon. Oh, really? And now the message that I sent is that the surgeon is more important for some reason than the dentist. And that gets fed in. I say this all the time, particularly in the medical school, about this sense of extra privilege that we think of towards medical doctors a lot of times. And we may also attribute a person's education to what type of person they may be. And those two don't have anything to do with one another. A person can be just as kind or as mean as someone else who has the same level of education or opposite. But those things can reinforce, and we don't realize this is happening. And then our last part is culture exposure. If we haven't been around people who are different or cultures that are different, then we may come in with a bias that there's something wrong with that culture, so we may not understand. And then on the flip side, we could be exposed to a certain culture, and so when we go into that situation, maybe we have a stronger affinities towards certain types of things. When I go down to the Southeast, for instance, because my family is from Kentucky, I have this strong affinity, and I'm quick to defend different stereotypes in particular that may come up about Southern people, particularly if they're Southern Black people, because of the exposure that I had when I was a child to that type of environment. So now, after giving you all those examples, here's some different pictures to kind of show you another way that this can play out. If, for instance, I said, okay, so Jasmine, I would like you to go over to the building over there, and there's going to be a gentleman there, and he is the financial planner that I need you to go ahead and talk to, and he's asked for some resources to help him about an article that he's going to write. And you say, okay, well, great, I will go over. Now, where am I going? Oh, I need you to go to building 4. He's going to be in room, I don't know, 2, 3, or 4. I'm not sure which, but you just go over there. And so you walk in as Jasmine, and you see these 3 individuals who are actually, none of them are in the room, but they're the only people over in building 4. And you choose a person that you're going to go up to, and assuming the person is a financial planner. I did this as a plant on purpose, since I wouldn't be able to see you guys and walk you through it. But a lot of times, what is going to happen is people are going to go to the first person, the gentleman who is on the left when we're facing the screen, the seemingly African-American or African-American mixed gentleman with the glasses and the suit. Because I set Jasmine up to think I'm looking for a financial planner. And in the United States, we tend to think a financial planner is going to be in a business type of thing, and I'm going into the library resource, and so potentially I'm in an academic environment or I'm in a professional building. I'm going to be most likely to assume he's the person I'm going to talk to. However, you may be a person who has interacted with somebody who looks more like one of the other 2 gentlemen on the screen, and so now you're just totally confused. And so you just automatically ask which one is the gentleman that you're supposed to talk to. And there's not necessarily anything negative or ill-willed towards that, but it's the biases that Jasmine carried in with her based on the way that she was brought up, her own personal identity, where she works, what she's used to seeing, assumptions that she's made, molds that society has formed. She didn't do anything wrong. She just went in and she made a snap judgment and potentially chose the wrong person. And then now here's another set of slides, and I'm just going to be quiet for about 30 seconds if I can kind of gauge how long that is. And I want you guys all to just look at these 6 individuals. These are all just pictures taken off the internet, so it's quite possible that some of them you might actually even recognize. And just take a little mental note of what sort of things you notice about the people on the screen. What sort of things do you feel when you're looking at these individuals? What do you think about them? What do you think maybe they do? Where they might be? Why they're there? Okay. So, think of, if you wrote it down, you can look and see it yourself, but just think, what sort of patterns did you notice when you were looking at those slides? We tend to, when we look at people or when we're looking at images, we tend to notice gender, facial expressions, ethnicity, clothing, body posture, age, setting, skin tone, and body type, among many other things. Another thing that I often tell people, I notice, it goes along the lines of body posture. Because of the work that I do, I read a lot into people's body language, quite a bit, because it gives me a lot of information about what the person's potentially not telling me, especially when doing tobacco treatment. The other thing is, because I notice body posture so much in others, I'm very likely to point out to people that if you see me standing or sitting with my arms crossed, it means absolutely nothing other than that that's a way for me to be comfortable. Because when you see a person cross their arms, it's often set up as something or interpreted as something that is closed or bothered. So the point here is to just think about, when you are interacting with people, what sort of things, what messages are you taking in? What are you prone to notice a little bit more? And even farther, what might, when you're noticing those things, be potentially fueled by a little bit of bias, whether positive or negative? And explore that. So those are really basic ones. When you think about bias, the easiest examples to make are the ones that are about gender, race, and physical ability, because they're more obvious typically, and it is easier for us to make assumptions based on what we're seeing. But there are other types of bias that play out. There's beauty bias, which we do a ton. There's tons of research on this, that we're often swayed by the attractiveness of an individual. My choice in pictures on the Who Would You Choose slide is also partially based on that. I put in people who would have different potential levels of attractiveness to different type of people. The same thing could even have come up on the last slide, which I didn't actually do that one on purpose. But studies have shown that people tend to react more favorably towards people who are perceived more attractive. There's also confirmation bias, and we do this when we are interacting with a person or a situation and we are looking for anything that confirms what we think the person or the situation is already. And so it could be, I see Mr. Lee come in, and I've read about him on paper, and his CV looks fantastic. And he comes in and he starts talking, and I'm like, I knew it. I knew, because he went to so-and-so university, I knew he was going to be this smart. I just knew it. And I knew that he was going to be like this, and that I knew he would be the perfect fit. To the point that you're actually missing the fact that he's really fidgety. He's actually not answering a lot of your questions very well, and many other things, because what you were looking for and keying in on is everything that confirmed what you already thought was going to be the presentation that you would see. Another one that we do is conformity bias, and this is like the concept of peer pressure. When we're in a room and say we're trying to make a judgment on something, one of the things that I do is I serve on various committees, and one is a financial aid committee, financial aid and scholarship committee. And so sometimes people will have strong feelings about who should or should not be awarded a particular grant or scholarship. And there could be somebody in there who's thinking, no, I don't agree with this, but there's a lot of other people in the room who have a different belief from you. Or there's only a couple, but their personalities They're very dominant. And what happens is you conform and you don't actually speak up. You go along with it even though you don't believe necessarily that's right, because you don't want to rock the boat, or we allow ourselves to be convinced that maybe we're wrong, or we're the only ones not seeing things right. So we conform, and then you end up having something play out the way that you didn't necessarily want. Another thing which is pretty similar to halo, similar to confirmation bias, how it can play out, is halo effect. And that's when we really focus on this one thing. So maybe we're given a choice. Do you want to work with this instructor, or do you want to work with this instructor? And they're pretty similar, but this one is just really, really easy going, and so I'm gonna go with that one because, well, I know they tend to be, you know, kind of just like they want a whole bunch and stuff, but they're just easy going. This other one over here, this instructor just asks too many questions. Yeah, I mean, honestly, really, you know, he or she does really tend to put together better presentations, but just a lot harder to work with. So I'm just going to ignore all these other things about instructor A because they got a really good personality. I like that. That's the halo effect. You use that to highlight everything and ignore everything else that is potentially negative or red flag. And the exact opposite of that is the horns effect. You focus so much on one aspect of an individual, and it could be, oh my gosh, I think that this person is high maintenance, and going on the fact that I'm not a person who likes to deal with high maintenance people. I'm just going to completely ignore interacting with the other person or ignore all the other things that they bring to the table because I don't like that, and I don't want to bring a high maintenance person into the mix. So that leaves me with a question for you to ponder. Which is more devastating, conscious or unconscious bias? And I'm not going to answer that question for you. So let's show other ways that this shows up. I gave you very specific situations, but here's some more general things. It comes up a lot in candidate recruitment and selection. We tend, when we're looking for people, when we're interviewing for whatever reason it may be, to set out a list of qualifications. And the one thing that you can do is consider, what qualifications do you really need? Sometimes we put in things that we want a person to have that aren't actually necessary, but what they do is they fit this type. And by identifying this type based on all of these things that actually aren't needed, and that's key, they're not actually needed, we've now eliminated the possibility or the idea of all these other people. So one thing we can do when we're recruiting candidates, when we're looking through any type of process, and maybe this is even if you're looking up a resource for somebody that you're working with, do you really need all of these qualifications, all of these specific things or requirements? Are they really, really required and needed? Or is it just something that has been formed and you can move out of the box, and that movement out of the box actually creates something wonderful? And when it is a person that you're searching for, whether it's a person that you want to join your team or you're trying to find a speaker, who do you envision? Do you envision the same type all of the time? And if you do, why? Is it really necessary? When I envision, I say secretary, for instance, a lot of times the first image that pops in my head is a female. And even odder, sometimes a female with glasses. I don't know what that's about. But I have this vision that pops in. What is that? That is a bias that's playing out. Now, the fact that I can go that deep into it means that it is less unconscious, but it is still something that happens because immediately, even though I'm giving this presentation and I say secretary, I think female. When that's not the case, and it's certainly not required. Also, when you're thinking about candidate recruitment and selection, where are you searching? Where are we putting? Are we always looking in the same places? Are we looking in places where we can potentially get a good mixture? And fit, I absolutely hate this concept now. Well, I don't know if they'll fit. What does fit mean? Usually, when we say fit, we mean just like us, whatever us happens to be. and we want everybody to be similar, but that's actually the exact opposite of what we want, because when we bring diversity of thought, of experience, of education, when we bring in the mix, yeah, sometimes it's a little bit more comfortable, but it actually tends to result in something far more beautiful, and you get a little bit more innovation that way. Also, another thing that we tend to do when we're looking for recruitment, to recruit people in, or maybe it could be in the case of admitting a person into a program, we're comparing them to predecessors, which isn't necessarily fair. If you're just looking at the actual qualifications that are needed, that's fair because it's necessary. But what we tend to do is we try to find somebody who's just like the person who left, and just like the person, not necessarily like, well, that person was extremely organized, and that is helpful. That's different. If you're like, well, you know, so-and-so was funny, and they were nice, and they always did this, and they did that, and did that, well, or they're not like so-and-so, but it doesn't actually matter. So all of those can play up into those processes of recruitment selection. Another thing that we tend to do is we tend to have repeat group members, or we have groups that all look the same, consist of the same group members or same experience, same background, same field, everybody grew up the same way, you know, something, anything like that. And when we do that, that means that we don't have the diversity of thought in there. And unconscious biases may actually end up ramped up more because you could potentially have so many people in with a similar experience that there's not enough people in there to bring in a different voice and to think of something different. Also, having the same members of multiple committees increases the likelihood of an individual's own biases affecting multiple decisions. So it's good not to have the same 3 people, say, on the same 3 committees that have a direct impact on the same group of people. What's best is when you can mix that up. Another thing that we may have in our teams is what happens in this FedEx commercial.
We have cost people ideas. We could open an account on FedEx.com, save 10% on online express fee. Okay, how about this? We open an account on FedEx.com, we save 10% on online express shipping. You just said the same thing I said, only you did. Yes, no, I did this.
So here, this poor gentleman has a great idea, and nobody's listening to him because he's not the man who's at the head of the table. He doesn't have the jacket on, his button-up shirt isn't all the way open, even though he does have a tie, and his demeanor and the way that he presents is just a little bit different. And so he has this wonderful idea, and nobody pays any attention until repeated by the same person who fits the mold of the person who's supposed to be the leader, who's supposed to have the good idea, and he does different posturing and his hand gestures, which they make a joke about. Another thing that we do a lot where our unconscious biases can play out is when we are designing things. It can be when we're constructing, if we have input on the construction of a building, when we design the layout of an office for someone. It can be anything like that. And in these 2 examples that I've provided here, the first one is a fitness center, and I don't know anything about this fitness center. It's just a picture, so I tried to cut off part of it. But say this fitness center on the inside has a fantastic aquatics area, and they have their weight area, their resistance training area set up fantastically for people who may need to use a wheelchair on a regular basis, so that the individuals who are in those situations can exercise just like people who don't have to use a wheelchair for whatever reason. And they have this beautiful design. However, their front doors there don't have a handicap accessible way of getting in. There's no button. So, of course, you're talking about resilient human beings who want to do something, they're going to be able to get in. But whoever did the design neglected to think about every aspect of what may happen. So a person who has full use of their legs has easier access to get into this building with wonderful design to accommodate those who don't, but missed this crucial element of being able to enter the building. Another thing we don't think of is who's pictured on our walls. Are we seeing on the walls in our pictures or in our brochures or on our websites images of multiple types of people with multiple types of inner identities? And then also the other side of that is maybe within the building there isn't that diversity, but the audience that you serve is not like you in some way or another. Is your audience represented in what you are putting out towards the rest of the world? Another thing that we do sometimes, and I really pay attention to this a lot now when I'm making presentations in particular, is our advertisements or messaging consistently promoting stereotypes. We do this a lot. We're looking at our curriculum here at the medical school to see when we're giving case examples, for instance, of different conditions or situations that may present in a clinical environment. Are we accidentally actually reinforcing stereotypes? Do we always show a certain type of individual who has a certain body type or presents with a certain type of illness situation or certain type of circumstances that we don't even realize that what we've actually been doing is reinforcing or creating stereotypes, because our unconscious bias is not allowing us to notice this. Another one that I'm going to show you step by step can happen in product development. So maybe we're fortunate enough to be people who are developing something or not. So Band-Aids, those have been around for a long time. God bless the Band-Aids when we got a cut. So here's an example. This is my arm of your standard Band-Aid. And so most people are going to go in the store. A lot of people don't think anything about Band-Aids. Sometimes they're going to be like, oh, great, they have clear strips because, oh, my goodness, I don't want everybody to look at this Band-Aid that's on my forehead. But we still have, they can't get the part that actually covers the wound to be clear as well. So you have a Band-Aid. And I've cut my arm. I put that on, and then I go to work. Or I can put this Band-Aid on. And this is a brand that I always find at Target, and I tend to buy it every time, even if I don't need Band-Aids, just so, in my tiny hope that they'll keep on making them. But these are Band-Aids that are made with taking into consideration that there are people who have darker skin tones. And if you look on this picture, it's very clear that the true color is far less noticeable than the Band-Aid brand. And this is just something that people may not think of. People have been making Band-Aids forever, and it's only recently that people have been able to find Band-Aids like this that are darker color. And so just to give you a little bit closer, side by side, that's the difference. So sometimes we may say something about flesh tone, but when we say flesh tone, what we may be looking at is a flesh tone that is like ours, not necessarily like everyone. So what can I do? I'm going to give you a couple things to think about in this last little bit of time that we have together, because there's 3 general places that we can start, and this is a really big overview, high level. And the first one, and to me, to a degree, most important, is self-exploration. We need to start looking at, what are my biases? What are these different things that I carry with me? Why are they there? What triggers them? How can I mitigate them? If I can start looking into those things, that's when I can start taking a little bit more control of my biases. You know, as I said earlier, I'm an African-American female, and shamefully, I took the implicit association test and found out that I have a bias towards African-American people. That is so messed up. So I can either sit and wallow in it, pretend that it's not there or whatever else, or I can explore it. And that's what I've done. And so I've explored, why do I sometimes have an unconscious bias towards people who look just like me, who don't deserve anything less than I deserve? And so as I went through it on time to explain it to you today, I started to really dig at that and figure out why that was there. What happened to create that potential bias towards people who even are like me? So, and if I can say that about people like me, then that means that we also have it about people who aren't like us. So what's most important is figure out what's going to also trigger that. So that can be in every single situation, but I've been able to identify what types of situation that's more likely to rear its ugly head, so that I can figure out how to get in the way of that and stop it, recognize when I might be doing it. Another thing when I'm exploring my biases is to look at, if I have done something that where my bias has impacted somebody else, how can I potentially salvage the damage or repair the damage that I caused? And the answer to this isn't going to always be that there is something you can do. Sometimes we just can't. We can't fix what it is that we did, but what we can do is learn from it and try not to do it again, try to do better next time. And that's key because, like I said, they're unconscious bias, so we're not always going to catch it, that it happened. We may not even recognize it, but once we do, that's where the power resides, where we can start potentially working on change. And then we can also think about in our self-exploration, how will I approach bias that I see displayed by others? This is something I'm working on quite a bit, and especially when I'm in committee situations, I try to point out when I'm worried that bias is playing out in some way. I've actually just had a conversation with our dean about making sure that we look at our committees, and I included myself in that committee process, and that I am the diversity advocate that is assigned to these 3 particular committees, but I have my own biases. And 2 of the 3 committees are step 1 and step 2 of student process. I shouldn't ideally be on both of those. There should be somebody else, because the biases I bring to the table are going to influence 2 levels when it's not a necessary thing. And then the other thing we can do is assess our teams. Like I was talking about in the example earlier, who's at the table? Also, who's not at the table? Both of those are really, really key when we're thinking about our makeup of our teams, whatever that said team might be, whether it's a research team, whether it's a working team, whether it's a team to go out and do something. Doesn't matter who's there, who's not there, and why. And then also really looking at who's most dominant and who's most silent in different situations. That dominant voice, we have to be aware of what that dominant voice does. And the dominant voice isn't necessarily always bad. It's just dominant. And recognizing the power dynamics that can come from that, or position power dynamics, and how they could play out in a team is important. And then think about, do you have token members? Token members being people that are just placed there as placeholders. You don't really want them. That's not appropriate. We should not do that. If we invite someone to the table, we need to be willing to listen to their feedback. And then the last part is to examine policies and procedures. And really, this is one that I work on quite a bit. I know, and others I've talked to, don't assume everyone gets it or knows how to be more inclusive. People don't always get it, or people may think that they get it, and we don't. So when you're thinking about policies and procedures, really think about how you can outline steps for people when you're talking about trying to create a more inclusive environment of any sort, and provide examples to help out, and then also designate champions. That's for multiple reasons. You don't want to burn yourself out if you're the lead of that. You also don't want to burn out people who are so-called responsible for that. And the more champions that you have, the more diversity in opinion you have, and the less repeat of the same bias you shouldn't have to encounter. Also, always assess and reevaluate your policies and procedures periodically, because they're not always going to fit the current circumstances or culture. You may start realizing that even when you were trying to be more inclusive, you actually did X, Y, and Z, which actually really ended up doing something else. So it's good to just reevaluate. And definitely through procedures and practices, question fit. When somebody starts talking about fit, really, really think about what that means, and is it the wrong time to be talking about fit. And then the last part is definitely be flexible but firm. Definitely, we have to be willing to bend if we're going to ask others to. We have to be willing to forgive our trespasses, so to speak, and those of others. But we also have to stand our ground, because with this kind of stuff, especially when you start talking about changing procedures or questioning who needs to have what or do certain things, you're going to have people who are going to push back. And if you're operating from the right perspective, then you just have to be willing to stand your ground there. And here's a couple additional resources, just real basic, that you could check out to, again, a very high level start. That book, Everyday Bias by Howard Ross, is fantastic. That's based on the training that we do here at Creighton. The implicit association test that Harvard has is also fantastic if you haven't taken that before, but be willing to take the feedback that you get. You can learn about implicit biases or unconscious biases that you may have towards all different types of people, and just be willing to explore them. And the last one, particularly for race and ethnicity, the Creighton Institute at The Ohio State University releases an annual state of situations that are going on in the country, and it's really a fantastic resource. So that's all that I have, and I am willing to talk about any questions that may have come up. Thank you.
If you have any questions, go ahead and feel free to type them into the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Karen. I guess I should tell you guys in case you didn't see it. Karen has shared its very good, concise presentation with a lot to think about. And it definitely is. There's a whole lot to think about. There's a lot to unpack, and this messes with my head on a regular basis, even as many times as I've spoken about it. It is a whole lot to think about.
Well, I'm not seeing any other questions come through, so we'll thank Shavonne. And remember, once you close out of the webinar, you will see in another window an evaluation, and we'd really appreciate it if you would just take a few moments and evaluate the presentation and the webinar today. And we will not have a Breezing Along with the RML in May, but be looking for announcements for our June session. And thank everyone for attending, and thank you, Shavonne.
Thank you.